Hello, Emily here. Although most of you probably just know me as Pussycat. If you don't come to my streams, you probably never heard me actually talk. Surprise! I'm very, very British. I've never actually recorded a voiceover before, and I'm really nervous. Which is ridiculous considering I stream to a live audience on a regular basis. It feels really, really weird to be talking to myself like this. But let's see what happens. For the uninitiated, the piece of art in this video is of Keith from Voltron. If you follow me on Tumblr, which you really should because I'm hilarious, and also I post a lot of GIFs, you may have noticed my sudden and rather unexpected fall into Voltron hell. Unfortunately, the show is really cute and fun, and it's nicely animated, and it's got giant robot space lions. What's not to like, really? Let's be honest. Keith is probably my favourite paladin, although Lance is a very close second. I've had a weakness for the slightly broody lone wolf type slash slightly socially awkward dork since my very early days in fandom. Thank you very much, Kai Hiwatari from Beyblade. Plus Keith is ridiculously pretty. It's the hair. I'm a real sucker for nice hair. For some specifics about the tools I'm using, I'm drawing in Photoshop CS6 using a Wacom Intuos Pro small tablet. In terms of the brushes, aside from one custom brush that I'll flag up later, I'm actually using the default Photoshop brushes. Usually I use a combination of the hard round pressure size brush and the hard round pressure opacity brush. Opacity, whatever. I've never really been one for creating custom brushes. I'm not really sure why. I've always thought it sounded like a fun thing to do, but I've always managed to get by using just the defaults, and I've never really felt the urge to try my hand at it. Maybe one day. I often get asked about my line work. I draw it all freehand. I don't use any stabilizers or the pen tool. I'm literally just using the default brush and drawing freehand. For me, it's quite a zen thing to do. It's like mostly I'm just tracing my sketch, so it's quite a mindless, I don't have to think too hard about it. I can just crack on with it. And it's part of drawing that I've always really enjoyed, except when the line art isn't playing fair, which happens more often than I would like. But yeah, doing the line work is something I really, really enjoy. Hair is one of my favourite things to draw, actually. A lot of my early art inspiration comes from anime and manga, where the characters have ridiculously long, beautiful, flowing hair. Stuff like Sailor Moon, Chobits, Disney, particularly The Little Mermaid. Since joining the Haikyuu fandom back at the beginning of the year, my life has been distinctly lacking in pretty hair to draw. I think Oikawa is probably the best of the bunch on that front, and there are certain Haikyuu characters that have such terrible hair we will not mention their names. With Keith, I was really taken with the idea of him wearing his hair up in a tiny, tiny ponytail. I'm not going to lie, I think he looks absolutely adorable here. And I like to imagine that Lance is somewhere in the background having some sort of crisis over this. Oh look, as if by magic, colour appears. I cut out all of the footage of me filling in the flats because I figured it would be pretty boring to watch. I always feel slightly guilty doing that part when I'm streaming because I am so slow at doing it. I do everything manually. Occasionally I use the lasso tool to select large areas, but for the most part I will just fill in by hand and then go around the edges and tidy up. I know there are shortcuts and much quicker ways of doing it, but I'm old and I'm stuck in my ways, and just let me have this one thing. For the lighting of this picture, I wanted something suitably dramatic, but I'm also very lazy. So what I did was I put all of my colour layers into a group, and then I clipped a multiplier layer above that, and I filled it with like a mid-tone brown. You'll just see me switching the layer on there. And then what I did was I erased parts where I wanted the light to be. At the moment I'm just figuring out where the light source should be coming from. I was initially thinking from the front, and I thought no, being backlit would be a much more dramatic thing to have in this picture. At the moment I'm just doing it in rough, using lasso tool to select the bits where I think the light should be, and then I'm just going in and tidying it up using using default brushes that I mentioned earlier on. Oh my god, this sleeve. I did this sleeve so many times. I don't know what it was, I just couldn't get it right, and as you'll see in a minute, I literally do it about 10 times. For the light source, it's coming up in a minute, but I decided that the way I'd done it wasn't quite bright enough. So on the multiply layer, I selected the pixels and then inverted the selection so it had selected the parts that I'd erased. This is probably sounding a lot more complicated than it actually is. And what I did was, on a layer underneath the multiply layer, I filled the selection with a bright yellow. The idea was to have him looking like he was standing in front of some sort of explosion or some fire, being that he is the red paladin and he represents fire, funnily enough. Funny how that works. For the background, this is the only time in this drawing that I use a non-default brush. I've had this cloudy texture brush for forever. I honestly do not know when or where I got it, which is a shame. If I can find the source, I'll hunt it down. But I like using it for things like clouds or just general texture. I think it has a really nice look. What I'm doing here is adding some bounce light. I'm not sure if that's the official name for it. I can't remember it. But basically it's just a light source that's coming from the opposite direction to the main light source, just to make the figure pop a little bit, and also to make places like his hair stand out against the dark of the background. It just makes it a little easier to read the figure. This is something that I do in pretty much all of my pictures, whether or not I'm being lazy with the rest of the colouring. I think if you use a colour that works well with the rest of the overall colour scheme, I think it's a really nice finishing touch. I'm nearing the end of the illustration here actually. From now on what I'm doing is sort of final colour adjustments, adding finishing touches to the hair, sort of stray strands of hair, that sort of thing. And I use my favourite function, which is image adjustments variations. It's a really nice tool for harmonising the colour scheme. I like to use magenta, a mixture of magenta and red. If I duplicate the layer and play around with the opacity of it, I think it creates a really nice final colour scheme. And that's that really. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.